Welcome to the online worship service here at First Jefferson UU Church in Fort Worth, Texas. My name is Reverend Dr. Aija Duelm, and I'm delighted to return here today as your guest speaker while your minister, Reverend Annie Furster, is having her well-deserved Sunday off. I'm glad you are joining us for worship. I welcome you who are new to this community. I welcome you who are returning here. I welcome members of Arlington UU Church who are joining us during this pandemic season. As a liberal faith community, we aspire to affirm the dignity and worth of every human being. We strive to do the work of justice, and we honor wisdom that is found in all faiths and all religions. We continue to gather in the safest ways possible for worship and for other activities that help us stay connected with each other and nurture our spiritual journey. And we reflect on our faith, our values, and how these call us to be in the world. So let us begin by centering ourselves as your talented minister of music, pianist Misha Beresnev, plays the prelude. We enter our sacred space together with words adapted from Andrew Kennedy and Dale Hudson. We come to love a church, the traditions, the history, and especially the people associated with it. And through these people, young and old, known and unknown, we reach out, both backward into history and forward into the future, to link together the generations in this imperfect but blessed community of hope and memory, to worship in remembrance of what we have been and in the hope of what we may become. Come, let us worship together. Please join in our opening hymn, which is number 159, This Is My Song. And our song leader today is David Binde.
This is my song, O God of all the nations, a song of peace for lands afar and mine. This is my home, the country where my heart is. Here are my hopes, my dreams, my holy shrine. But other hearts in other lands are beating with hopes and dreams as true and high as mine. My country's skies are bluer than the ocean, and sunlight beams on clover leaf and pine. But other lands have sunlight too and clover, and skies are everywhere as blue as mine. Oh, hear my song, thou God of all the nations, a song of peace for their land and for mine.
As Unitarian Universalists, we begin our service by lighting a chalice, which is a symbol of our faith. This morning, I used the words of Lisa Degi. Why a flaming chalice? The question comes. It's a cup of life, we answer. A cup of blessings overflowing. A cup of water to quench our spirit's thirst. A cup of wine for celebration and dedication. The flame of truth, the fire of purification, oil for anointing, healing. Out of chaos, fear, and horror, thus was the symbol crafted a generation ago. So may it be for us in these days of uncertainty, sorrow, and rage, a light to warm our souls and guide us home. This Sunday, we pause to remember history of 9/11 and the 400th anniversary of Mayflower arrival at Plymouth. Both of these events are tragic, marked with grief and sorrow. Both have been shaped the story of the national identity. I offer you some questions to consider today during the service and after. These questions are for you. You can use them for your own spiritual reflections or as conversation starters for deep conversations with each other as you reach out to stay connected. One such opportunity is coming up on Tuesday evening during the Zoom meeting to share your thoughts and experience of today's worship theme. So the questions are, how does the strength of identity and culture survive through time and space? What identity stories have you inherited? And how do you engage your UU faith values to counter oppressive myths? In what ways do we continue to value indigenous culture, but not its people? As you think about these questions throughout the service, I will offer my reflections and thoughts with you. These will come in two sections. But before we begin, I invite you to ground ourselves in the covenant of this community. Please join me in reminding ourselves of the promise we give to each other. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest of truth is our sacrament, and service is our prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve others in community to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with creation. Thus do we covenant with one another. The message for all today comes from the Unitarian Church of Sharon in Massachusetts, and it is the work of Louise Marcoux and Reverend Jolie Olivetti. And it's called The Story of the Kid Who. It is a story of a kid named Chris. One day, Chris was hanging out at a soccer tournament. And one kid from another team came to him and said, "Oh, you are the kid who fell down the stairs." Chris went to grocery shopping with Mom. A lady chatted with Mom and then turned to Chris and said, "Oh, you're the kid who took the first prize in violin." At school, Chris got called down to the office. The office was full of kids waiting for a turn to talk with the secretary. She turned to Chris and said, "Oh, you are the one who forgot your lunch." Chris was at CVS one day with Dad. Mr. Bailey, their neighbor, was talking with his friend. And when Mr. Bailey turned to introduce Chris to his friend, that man said, "Oh, you're the kid who discovered the raccoons nesting in Mr. Bailey's garage." At recess, while they were playing Foursquare, a kid from another class came by, watched for a while, and then said, "Oh, you're the kid who hit the home run and won the game." Or maybe it was, "Oh, you're the kid who told the teacher your dog ate your homework." How do you think Chris felt when people remembered Chris as the kid who? I'd like for us to think for a moment about something that you did that was really great. And also think about a moment where you did something that was kind of embarrassing. How would you feel to be remembered just for either one of these things? Would the people who remembered you just as a kid who really get who you are, the whole you? We need to feel seen and appreciated as whole people, not as the best at or the worst at, but as whole people who love, who feel happy and sad, who struggle sometimes, and who get things done sometimes. This weekend is a time for memory, a time for remembering people and events from the past. And we remember people well when we let them be whole people, not only by the best thing that they did, not only by the worst thing that they did. We do that best when we stay open. We stay open-minded about who they were, and when we allow them to be whole people who did some things well and sometimes did not. Please join us in the hymn 315, This Old World. David.
This old world is full of sorrow, full of sickness, weak and sore. If you love your neighbor truly, love will come to you the more. We are children of one family. We're all brothers, sisters too. If you cherish one another, love and friendship come to you. This old world can be a garden, full of fragrance, full of grace. If we love our neighbors truly, we must meet them face to face. It is said, now love thy neighbor, and we know well that is true. This the sum of human labor, true for me as well as you.
As a child, I had some interest in history. Mostly, I was interested in where I came from, in the events and stories about what had happened years ago in my hometown. For one, I was surrounded by historical markers like architecture and monuments. You may not be familiar with the town in Latvia where I grew up. It was founded at the crossroads of 3 rivers, where 2 rivers came together to form the third one. Then later, in the 12th century, a castle was built at this crossroad, in the place of people's wooden houses. There are actually 3 castles in the area I grew up in. These castles stand as reminders of the events that have taken place a long time ago. They embody the labor of local people who carried the stones to build the massive structures, and they remind us of the powers that ruled the day with lavish splendor, even though all that was left of some of these castles were ruins that I was climbing on as a child. Some places do not have any markers to remind of what had happened there. In my exploration as a child, I discovered a place in my town where people had built a hanging place for witches. It was by one of the rivers where the land had formed a hole. There is no sign at the place. I made my best estimate to locate the area through my own research in looking up folk history. And since I'm not a historian, I cannot guarantee that this is truly the place where it was. However, my younger self was convinced that this spot was a place imbued with memory. Whenever I felt sad and upset, I would go to that spot. Somewhere deeply, I believed that this place could hold suffering. While no woman was hung at this particular location, to me it held the memory of other people's pain. It gave me some comfort because it meant that this place is capable of holding my pain. The land holds memories, good ones and not so good ones. Memories of events that have happened on it, memories of pain and suffering, and memories of joys and celebrations that have taken place there. Some memories are shared from generation to generation. Some remain unspoken when there is no one to share the story. Some have changed as the story shifts based on who is telling the story and what has transpired since. 9/11 is such an event, a significant one for some of us, and it has burned into our memories. How do we remember this event? And how do we tell our children about it? Because there are many who have no direct memory of this moment. And as they watch the videos, do they see more than just the special effects of seeing the building crumbling down? What will the next generation make of 9/11? And we ourselves might be struggling with the legacy of this event because of what happened after the attacks. Many of us probably still remember where we were that day, how we learned of the attack on the Twin Towers and the Pentagon. I was not here in the States when 9/11 happened. And I do remember how I learned about the event. I was in Latvia in my apartment, anticipating my friends coming over for the Bible study. One of my friends had heard about what happened, and we turned on TV and we saw the news report. We were sad. We were sad about the loss and suffering of people, and we wondered what will happen next, and will flying be safe? You see, I was leaving for Austria a few days later by plane. The next thing I remember was that I was in Austria for my studies. One night we had a party. We were dancing, having fun. And one of our faculty members came down. He turned the music off and told all of us that the United States has announced a war with Iraq. I remember that moment as my heart broke. I do not have good memories of wars. Wars that my country has experienced have caused a lot of suffering, pain, and destruction. Needless to say, the party was over. It is difficult to reflect on 9/11 because the loss, pain, and devastation of that day was followed by further pain and destruction. The attacks on American soil took away the illusion of the untouchability of America. Some were awakened to the realization that Americans are not all powerful, all loved, and all welcomed. At that time, many believed that war was called for as a patriotic response and hoped it would bring justice. We now know that it brought more pain than good. More than 5,000 American troops and more than 100,000 Iraqis have died. And it is not over. Iraq is still struggling. American people are still reckoning with what to make out of this tragedy and our culpability in it. As soldiers come home, can we welcome them without dismissing them with a cliché, "Thank you for your service" statement? Instead, are we as civilians ready to engage the complex memory of these events? Are we prepared to hold all that the soldiers are as persons, all that they witnessed and experienced during their deployment? As I was reflecting on what could help hold the memories of the loss and pain of the 9/11 events, and afterwards, I came upon a statue. It is a memorial called Teardrop, and you can see it on the screen. It sits across from New York City in Bayonne, New Jersey, on the other side of the Statue of Liberty. This 100 feet tall monument was a gift to the people of the United States from people in Russia in 2006, in memory of all those who lost their lives on September 11, 2001. I offer this image of tears to you as one way to hold complex memories. Why tears? The photographer Rose Lynn Fisher used microscopes to capture images of human tears. She had realized that everything we see in our lives is just the tip of the iceberg visually. And she began to wonder what a tear looks like close up. She examined and photographed more than 100 tears, her own and other volunteer dried tears, including a newborn baby. What she discovered was that a tear looked like an aerial view, almost as a landscape you would see from a plane. And you can see some images on the screen. Scientifically, tears are divided into 3 different types. Tears triggered by extreme emotions, by joy or sadness. Basal tears that are released continuously to keep cornea lubricated. And reflex tears that come in response to an irritant, dust, onion, tear gas. They differ in the chemical substances they contain. Emotional tears contain protein-based hormones, including a painkiller. It's a natural painkiller that is released when the body is under stress. The drying circumstances can also affect the way salt crystals look. And that's why tears look very different from one another. Fisher concludes that tears are the medium of our most primal language in moments as unrelenting as death, as basic as hunger, and as complex as a rite of passage. It is as though each one of our tears carries a microcosm of the collective human experience, like one drop of an ocean. Tears hold our complex experiences and memories. They hold them in a way that calls out compassion in us and connects us with one another. I believe it's true that for most of us, when we see tears in another person's eyes, we reach out in care. We seek to provide comfort. Tears move us toward goodness. And we need goodness in this world. Goodness, not violence. We have plenty of it already. I think tears are quite a powerful tool that brings out the goodness we are capable of. Because tears connect us. They do that not just in sadness and grief, but also in goodness, in laughter and joy. We do sometimes end up tearing up from a very good laugh. As we think about tears and these images, we pause here to consider our own lives and experiences. We pause to hold one another in care and support, knowing that our daily lives bring us joys and concerns, sometimes pain and sorrow. If you would like to lift up something that you are experiencing during this time and would like the congregation to know about it, please send an email or give a call by Friday so we can share about your experience during the worship service and hold you in our prayers and our thoughts, as well as rejoice with you in joyful events. Today, we are holding in our hearts people who are experiencing devastating wildfires raging throughout the West Coast. We send our thoughts and prayers and comfort, hopes to them, hoping that they can find safety and good weather, helpful weather comes to help fires get extinguished. We remember people who were lost in 9/11 and after. We hold one another as we remember our own emotions of that day. So let us enter into a time of meditation and prayer. Breathe with me. Feel the ground beneath your feet as it supports you. Feel the love of this community as it embraces you. Feel the breath as it flows in and out of your body, and offer gratitude. Gratitude for the opportunities to love that come in the turmoil of life. Where tears flow and hands are held without words, let us be present. Present to sadness, present to success. Let us gracefully enter moments of discomfort and open our hearts to discover new ways of seeing the old, appreciating the complexities within it, and allowing for possibilities to emerge. For in taking care of one another, we are cared for. To begin my second response, I want to offer you a reading. It is actually a prayer written by Jude Geiger called Teach Us to Remember Our History. Spirit of life, God of many names, source of hope. We come together at the end of another week, some worn down by struggles of health, of home, or work. May we be a community that makes space for the sharing of joys and sorrows, angers and hopes, with grace and forbearance. In our nation's life, we pause this weekend to remember the Native American lives lost from the European colonization on what is now our soil. Teach us to remember our history. Though we cannot make amends for what has come before, may we learn from those days never to repeat them in our lives today. May we develop new ways of relating to neighbor and stranger, without violence or coercion, deceit or greed. Mother of grace, help us to find a sense of humility where we have privilege and strength where we face oppression. In our struggles, may we learn compassion. And in our power, may we learn temperance. As a community of faith, may we be a safe harbor in a world that is often harsh toward difference. Challenge us to use our presence as a healing force for justice and equity. Knowing that although we have come far in the civil rights struggles of our times, there are many people still left behind. And the work of building the beloved community is just as pressing as ever before. To remember well is to remember the whole story, with all its bad and good. I wonder where the story begins. Growing up in Latvia, the history of the country that is taught in schools begins with the Ice Age and the first people who settled in the area around 8,500 BC. However, when I look at the history books written about the history of America, the first chapter is usually about Columbus and the discovery of the American continent. This is another complicated story for today. The myth of the beginnings of America. This year is the 400th anniversary of the arrival of the ship Mayflower. The descendants of the Mayflower are celebrating with various events, including the reenactment of the ship travel scheduled to depart England on September 16th. They are encouraging everyone to draw inspiration from the stories of the originators of the America and their success. We too, as UUs, have benefited from these events and their story. These people gave rise and shaped our UU faith. Yet to remember well is to remember the whole story with all its bad and good. To be true to our faith, we're called to look at all the events that took place with the arrival of the Mayflower. When the English ship Mayflower, with its 102 passengers and 30-person crew, arrived in Provincetown Harbor, the first tribe they encountered was the Wampanoag tribe. This tribe had lived in the southeastern Massachusetts for more than 12,000 years. Yet, at the time of Mayflower, their lives were changed forever. Already before the Mayflower arrival in 1614, 27 Wampanoag men were kidnapped and sold as slaves in Spain. Only one is known to have returned home, Tisquantum, or known as Squanto. However, when he returned 5 years later, he found that all was lost. Natives were stricken by catastrophic plague that killed tens of thousands and weakened the tribe. The great migration of English immigrants displaced Wampanoag people, forcing natives to move into praying towns and reservations. The displacement, plagues, and oppression eroded much of their cultural richness. Their native language began to disappear by the mid-17th century. The last person who spoke the language died more than 100 years ago. 50 years ago, Frank James of the Aquinnah Wampanoag tribe was asked to speak to commemorate the 350th anniversary of the Mayflower voyage. His remarks were censored, and thus he declined the invitation and instead made his speech on Thanksgiving Day, which led natives to embrace Thanksgiving Day as the national day of mourning. Here is some of what he said. It is with mixed emotion that I stand here to share my thoughts. This is a time of celebration for you, celebrating an anniversary of a beginning for the white man in America, a time of looking back, of reflection. It is with a heavy heart that I look back upon what happened to my people. Even before the Pilgrims landed, it was common practice for explorers to capture Indians and take them to Europe and sell them as slaves for 220 shillings apiece. The Pilgrims had hardly explored the shores of Cape Cod for 4 days before they had robbed the graves of my ancestors and stolen their corn and beans. Massasoit, the great sachem of the Wampanoag, knew these facts. Yet he and his people welcomed and befriended the settlers of the Plymouth plantation. Perhaps he did this because his tribe had been depleted by an epidemic, or because of his knowledge of the harsh oncoming winter was the reason for his peaceful acceptance of these acts. This action by Massasoit was perhaps our biggest mistake. We, the Wampanoag, welcomed you, the white man, with open arms, little knowing that it was the beginning of the end, that before 50 years were to pass, the Wampanoag would no longer be a free people. James' speech became a pivotal point in mobilizing Native American movements for their continuous efforts to resist their eradication. Later in 1993, under the leadership of Jessie Little Doe Baird, the Language Reclamation Project began. In collaboration with several tribes, they are working on reviving Wampanoag language, and they already have taught children who are now the first to speak the language again after 100 years. We cannot change what have happened. Let me say that again. We cannot change what had happened. What we can change is who we are today and tomorrow, who we choose to be while remembering what had happened. To remember well means to choose to hold the whole story. This time, we are called to stand with the tribes, and instead of celebrating the violence and oppression, choose the hope. Hope that we are capable of learning and practicing compassion, that there might be a possibility for relationships to find healing and have a future where the whole story is remembered and all people are held in dignity. We are invited to join other UUs and hold the memory of Mayflower in mourning. Just as tears can hold our complex memories and experiences, may we challenge ourselves to be the people, the community, that intentionally seeks to hold the whole story, the whole people, in hope that restoration of relationships could be possible, in hope of who we can become as people and as community. So in hope, may it be so. Please join in our final hymn, 168, One More Step, as a commitment of being willing to do what it takes.
One more step, we will take one more step, till there is peace for us and everyone will take one more step. One more word, we will say one more word, till every word is heard by everyone. We'll take one more word. One more prayer, we will say one more prayer, till every prayer is shared by everyone. We'll take one more prayer. One more song, we will sing one more song, till every song is sung by everyone. We'll take one more song.
As we extinguish the chalice, may we carry its light in remembrance of what we have been and in the hope of what we may become. The words of Dale Hudson. On this day, we remembered those who are no longer present with us, but who remain in our hearts and in our memory. And we hope and pray that our leaders will guide us in ways that promote peace, justice, reason, and love. May you go forth, emboldened to carry this hope of who we could be as people living on this land.